Okay, I don't know how hard this is going to be. I shouldn't have gotten in the sun, but it's not really that warm out here, so stand up here I can see better. I want to talk a little bit about this set of diagrams and what I wrote here. Man, it's not really working very well. I was trying to give you a look at it. This might be stupid because you might not be able to see it. But what? I don't know. I shouldn't call myself names. Now it's way too bright. And then I got my sunglasses on too. Or my glasses are darkened because of the sun. Anyway, I wanted to come outside because it's the first day that I've noticed that it's warm enough to be comfortable out here. That being wrapped up, that's kind of nice. And I was screwing around, and I've been home alone, which really isn't that big of a difference because I'm coming out of my room very often, it seems like. But been home alone for a few days. Kids are out of town, and back about a month ago, maybe, or something like that, I changed my room around a little bit, moved my table over to the other side of the room, and cleared it off, and put a couple of my poster board diagramming things down on there, and kind of cleared myself a spot to look at them more, and haven't really done so, and not very much, and I decided to get a look at it. So I came out and was reading this. Okay, and make sure I'm on. This is stupid to sit around for 20 minutes, and okay, we're fine. And I had a look at this diagram here, and this was kind of, I kind of recall this as being rather spontaneous, I guess, and improvisational, writing this out here. But I was thinking about my diagrams that have to do with level, equal, right measure of people, and I drew one of them out there, and then decided, I guess, to talk about the dividing the inequality and the changing of the equality of everyone who should be equal as men always. Jesus agreeing with that, telling love and measure self means love and measure equal. So loving people properly and behaving lawfully toward them is to consider them as equals. And the things that I go after a lot of times are not attempts really, are actions taken toward calling out the inequality and describing it, and showing the danger that the inequality that we measure to others gives us not only a danger but a real impact to our righteousness. Well, the reason being that take heed how you hear, which probably means take heed how you hear what other people say about other people, and I guess about yourself also. Take heed how you hear, because with the measure you measure, it'll be measured to you again. And taking heed how you hear, the way someone might measure a condemning or diminishing measure to someone else. The thing you take heed to is to make sure you don't agree with it. And we'll talk a little bit, I think, in here about coming on board with, as a cliche way to say it, coming on board with an expression out of your own decision-making ability, and the ability to describe your decision by saying things, and your ability and your tendency even, and the popularity being an issue too, of coming out and saying negative things about other people in judgment that hurts you, because the rest of what Jesus said there is to take heed how you hear, and definitely take heed how you speak. Judge not, that you be not condemned, or that you be not judged, really being better able to be understood as condemn not, that you be not condemned. Because saying judge not is for the uninitiated or the untrained, I guess, and those that haven't thought about it very much. we don't really think in terms of positive acquitting and justifying judgments as being part of judgment. So when people see that, they say, "Judge not, be not judged." They're thinking in terms of condemn not, because they don't even think in terms of justifying someone when there's a judgment. They're so sure that judgment is negative and condemning that they pretty much presume that Jesus was talking about that, and that they put the word judge there and rendered what he said as being the word judge, when the idea that condemn not is much more accurate as far as the warning to be careful not to make condemning judgments, because then you should be concerned about receiving the judgment that you judge, the measure that you measured out, coming back to you again. If you measure out a judgment of condemn, then the danger of that, and the reason to warn about that, is because you will receive a judgment of condemnation for handing out a judgment of condemnation. And there's probably, you could talk a little bit about whether, when my judgment comes out and I speak, whether, never mind, I lost track of it. And so, back toward the aim of this, I don't want to take a long time necessarily, because this is kind of almost an afterthought to talk about this one. In the continuum with infinity arrows on the end to show that it reaches to everyone, however many billion men there's been now, 9 or 10 probably. Don't know what the figures are on what people think well, there are people that think the earth has been around and mankind's been around for billions of years, so they don't really wouldn't need to worry about including them probably. But there's 7 billion or so people now, and as fast as they can kill them, it seems like they're doing so. So it's kind of slowing down a little bit in the growth of it all, I guess. But in the considering of everyone to be equal and their heads to be at a full place where there's no condemning and no loss of their rights or their right standing, then seeing that as your proper way to judge and to have always a level and equal judgment of the value of everyone, and to not condemn them. The condemnation can be real, because it can be a condemnation for an action of harm that has actually occurred. So people do get condemned for what they do, but being condemned by you just because you think that they're less, when you don't even have a clue, then that's really what you're being warned about. And this is a pretty much a good description of why we should be careful about thinking much of our groups. And it's going to lay it out completely, and it won't really take very long. In a minute here, I'll probably just read down through what I've said and probably not even have to add very much to it. Because, this is kind of a thinking out loud, or thinking with my pen, because of wanting to learn to run these diagrams better, because I still dream that someday someone's going to want to listen to what I say, and that I may be in front of them with a pen and a board and being able to do these diagrams. So getting better at expressing it helps me. And it may help you if you take time to watch this. That's good, because it should help you, and it should make you an unusual man or woman, because you learn this lesson, because it's not very commonly held. And that's, when people think that everybody's sinners and everybody's condemned, this is a big part of why they're not far off. And then Jesus warning, to avoid that, because you measure rightly. And then my message coming out 4 years now, that measure is not only the foundation, but the operation of righteousness, and the real threat to not operating your life righteously and operating in a condemned fashion actually has to come from this. And this is, I haven't been able to avoid talking about collectivism and the harms of it. Outside, aside from the individualism, the individualism and collectivism they may not exactly be opposites, but they kind of close enough to that are, I guess you'd say. We can call it that. That individuals have the ownership of their lives, and the collective doesn't have the ownership of their lives. And men are allowed to control what they're sovereign over, which is their individual selves. That making ascension. I was thinking when I was getting up today, everything, the right to control things always comes out of creation. If you're trying to figure out who has the right to control something, you have to look to find out who created it, and if they are not still considering themselves to possess the thing that's been created, that they've transferred it to someone else. God creating us transfers the ownership of our lives to ourselves and gives us the sovereignty as men to decide our way and to choose and to be individuals. So the individuality comes from, sorry, this table's shaky. I tend to forget and bump it. The sovereignty and the individuality have to come together, and men decide for their one life to live everything about it when there's no harm being done to them. And so when anybody believes that, well, for example, myself, anybody believes they have any power to control me, then you could ask them why they think they created me, and they say, well, I didn't create him, but I get to control you. So what brings that about? Why does the creation of the property of my life and liberty and the rest of the things that are proper to me, how does it become improper to me, improper to you, just because you said? How could that be? You didn't create me, so how do you own me? You think I've transferred ownership of myself to you? That I consent to be your slave? Well, I don't think that's true. So if you think that you get to control me, then you're wrong. And this diagram, hopefully you, maybe I should give one more try at this. Hang on just a second here. Let me hold it here for a second and give you a chance to kind of get a look at it in case you don't want to go back and all that kind of thing. So you see here in the second section, where on the left, the diagram, where the pen writing comes in, I've shown the dividing up of a collective, naming something and making it be the containing of individuals. That in the time, not the timeline, but in the infinity demonstration of every man being equal, then you're putting boundaries around some of them, and we're going to talk about what that has to do with harming our righteousness, and it's going to be of some value. Probably been about 10 minutes of this, so I probably shouldn't take very much longer because you have time, it's your time, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to try not to complain about my cord on my mic. It's going to work out okay if I don't. So let me go down and just kind of read along here and see what we can find out. So in alongside of the regular continuum, I had mentioned that the O's or the zeros, what they really are, is a diagram of people's heads, that every one of them equals the other, and that's unto infinity, because every man being equal takes away the difference between you and another and makes everyone that's ever existed be equal in those things. It doesn't reach the end. In the drawing, in the designing of a collective, it reaches an end because men put borders on things. But then we're going to talk about how that believing that there's an inclusion and an exclusion means that those that are being excluded are being judged as less and outsiders. And this is very normal and has at least the roots of unrighteousness and wickedness in it. And I would say really that even though people don't maliciously do it on purpose, that being proud of the group that you're in and thinking less of others outside of it seems like normal life to you, and you don't think you're doing it as a problematic thing, but that you thought your group is great means that you think others outside of it are less, and so you diminish them in your judgment. You may not say anything about it. You may be safe for a long time. This is the American exceptionalism and nationalism. It does this all of the time, and religions do this kind of thing all the time, and there's always a danger of it in every group that's formed, because you have to be careful how you think about the thing you're watching out for. If you're going to be righteous and you're going to maintain it, is you have to watch out for diminishing people and judging them as less. So the condemning, the devaluing, condemnation is always a devaluing. So if you're diminishing people's value in your view, even internally, without bringing that out into the interaction between men and saying something or doing something, that demonstrates your valuation. Your valuation is already bringing a danger to you because of the inequality that you've allowed in. And within yourself, you see an inequality, and you might even still think that you measure everybody as equals, but then the danger to that being failed is when certain people, most of the time you don't know them, that certain kinds of people in your view are considered to be less, then the danger is there for you to fail and to be condemned because of your judgment. So then condemn not, that you be not condemned, is something that you're not being careful enough, probably because you don't understand condemnation and you don't recognize that any kind of devaluing of someone is what condemnation is. Damn is condemn with damnation, damn and damn, the root being a loss of value. So condemnation is with a loss of value. Like the word indemnify I've mentioned before, it's to protect you against the loss of value. Then they put back the value, like as insurance, when you have the loss in value that you're insured against. Then the indemnifying is to put back the value that you lost because of the arrangement that you made. So it has to do with value in and value out. So when you condemn, then you're taking value out of someone. It's people. And it can be God too, I suppose, and angels, but we're really talking about people here because this isn't going to be coming. We're not going to make it so spiritual that you dodge the truth of watching out for your collectivism. So collectivism is trained into you, and it may mention that down in here, but I'm about ready to get started. Right, we're just reading it. So the equality unto infinity. It's righteous, and it's right, and it's known as right secure. This is the full correct standing of every man equally. Anything else adjusting this fundamental true nature of man is false, and every other judgment besides this full presentation of man's equal value is wicked measure, and when spoken or acted upon is wicked judgment. So the threat for you to make your judgment wicked and therefore be condemned by how you measure out to others, having it measured back to you, has to do with that you'll adjust your view of the true nature of man to inequality. So moving your view of men to inequality is bringing the danger about that Jesus was warning against. And I've found through much investigation and much obsession that this measure is the real basis of righteousness and unrighteousness, and it's always the trigger of sin. To do it wrongly, to do it rightly, is always the protection against sin. So it's pretty important stuff. So down I've shown, I tried to show you a couple times anyway, that in this infinity line of everyone being equal, that putting borders around certain ones of them and making a collection of them that does not include those outside of the boundaries of it, then that exclusion is going to cause some changes, and we need to talk about them a little bit. So as I pointed a little arrow pointing over to the little section that's been cordoned off there, this collective removes the infinity and the equality and makes a boundary. So you've made, in having everybody infinitely equal, because God made them that way, and then no one has the power to change that thing. Putting boundaries around any of them has added something artificial to it, and has made automatically a difference between the valuation of the ones on the inside and the ones on the outside. It can't be avoided. It's why the collective is. It may be that they have innocent enough motives for. No, it's not that they have innocent enough motives. The motives are wrong. That they make a collective and they do that to rule over them and to make their servants and their slaves special, and to cause their servants and slaves to be willing to and able to and well trained to make those outside of your collective less than you. There's no reason to make a collective unless you want to head it, and if you want to head it, you want to have power over people. So the societies aren't automatic occurring things. They're designed things, and they're designed by those who want to have power. So they're designed for purposes of wickedness, to institutionalize wickedness, and making collective and showing people within that you name those within your collective, give them an honored position in that, and in some kind of a sense, or at least you trick them into believing so, and that everybody else outside is dishonored equally by that. So the temptation to recognize and think in terms of the boundaries that are placed on there, the artifice of artificial designations of certain ones of these people who are by God to be made equal and to be valued equally. To the placing of that brings a discretion of those who have that kind of power to bear on the situation, and it gives the potential for others to have an agreement with the discretion, that then they bring their discretion into it. Now you and not the leaders are saying that we're great and those outside are less, or we deserve to live and be safe and secure, but those outside need to be killed because they we've been told by our masters that there are enemies. So there's no in an infinity line that has everyone as equal, where there's no boundary between you and the other, everyone is equal, then there's no diminishing of those that's in that view. So when you make a boundary and you put one of them on the other side of that, then it is already a change to the way that you and the others that would agree with you are rating the value of those. So then that makes an artificial boundary. Artificial. Why do you say artificial, Joe? Isn't it a real boundary? Well, have you walked up to the boundary between, say, I don't know, let's try and think of states that are actually side by side. You walk up to where Florida starts and Georgia ends, for example, and you see a line there. Is there a real difference between Florida and Georgia, or is it just a perceived difference? Is it a difference that someone, by their discretion, by deciding a boundary, has caused you to have to try to see a difference between them? Putting the boundary there and naming those things that way is a difference already. So it's already contrary to righteousness of equality. If you're thinking in terms of the men that live there, if you think less or more of either of them, then how did an inequality get into your measure? It seems automatic because someone said that they're different than you. So people named them and designated them. And in doing so, they designate others outside of that. So anyway, that may have been too long, but there's some clues in there that are good for you. So when you put those boundaries on certain ones and you include the ones within it and you exclude the ones without it, that exclusion and inequality created by the false inclusion, it's not real to include these and say they're different because they're all equal. So when you grab a bunch of them and say that they're different, then you've lied and you've deceived and you've done so with power over others outside of that is as your plan. There's no innocent way to do it. Sorry. It's not innocent. It never was innocent. It's always been wickedness. Do people worry about divisions in church? You gotta worry about the divisions that are in your head because you think that you're different than other people outside of various kinds of collectives that you believe are real, that are not real, that are in fact deceptions and are artifice, and the world created by that is artificial and is when interacted with going to harm your ability to be righteous in the real world, in the earth, where these designations aren't. Designations and differences, demarcation, I guess, between you and others is an artifice. Exclusion and inequality, or inequality. Exclusion and inequality created by false inclusion includes as they perceive inclusion. They exclude outsiders, and valuing insiders as something unequal, they devalue those excluded. This measure works this next setup. And so in the next diagram, I showed that collective as being moved down into the condemned, out of the normal righteous standing of every man as equals. That section has been moved down to be condemned because of this exclusion and this variation in the judgments that they made. So and then an arrow pointing toward the collective who's been condemned in this new view. All the while, this inclusion is self-evidently an artificial, also known as a fiction. And then a legal, in parentheses, a legal fiction is defined here. People you can find easily that the corporation that the United States is, for example, is a legal fiction. If it's a corporation, it's a legal fiction. It is a corporation, and it's in its bylaws. It's plainly stated. So let me start this again, just this last sentence. All the while, this inclusion is self-evidently an artificial, also known as fiction. A legal fiction is defined here and is really an incorporation. Believing in inequality or difference is deceived. The believing of an inequality or difference is deceived or is a deception, and promoting it is a lie. As I was first sitting down here, I was thinking, what do you mean a lie? I didn't say anything. Well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I was thinking if you're in a group of, say, 3 people, and there's a fourth that's outside of the place where you are, and I guess I could use names. Bill says that Mary stole Ted's burrito or whatever, and then you go around saying that Mary is a thief because you've heard that. It seems true to you, but if it was a lie the whole time, if it never was the case, then when you say, when you didn't take heed how you heard the accusation against Mary, you are taking that on as your own judgment, and if you say that, then you're the one who is lying and is diminishing and condemning that individual without knowledge of a reason that they should be rightly condemned. Believing in inequality or difference is deceived or deception, and promoting it is a lie. Stating it, when it comes out your mouth that we're better or they're worse, then you've stated it, and it's a lie, and it's unrighteousness, and it requires repentance, and it may require getting yourself right with those who you've accused, or at least in your prayer and in your speaking out, at least repentance to justify them where you've previously condemned them. This is the value of praying for those who despitefully use you, and praying for your enemies, because you perceive them as your enemies, and if they've never hurt you and you perceive them as your enemies, then praying for them or seeking their well-being is the way that you behave as though they're not your enemies. So your false judgment that they're your enemies doesn't get acted upon, but gets repaired by your love for them. You're loving them as your equals because you don't believe the judgment that's against them. There are lots of people on the earth who have been abused by American soldiers coming to their places and killing a bunch of them, and I don't consider any of them my enemies, and they would consider me their enemy because they think I'm part of that. Oh well, just have to take it. You can go back and listen to it again if you want, or else you just quit and go away and just be a good American and not be righteous, whichever that bothers you. I don't want to get in the mood to talk about the empire being wicked. I want to just finish this, because the empire is always going to be that collective. Every empire is that collective, and every one that's outside of that which is measured to be one within that empire is considered to be enemies and considered to be less than us and worthy of being stolen from and killed and destroyed for the sake of our good and for our mighty emperor and his empire. Those who receive a boundary of exclusion from equal measure are condemned and self-devalued by it. Because when you value the inclusion and you devalue the exclusion, when you take that boundary, you have caused yourself condemnation if you make any kind of move to show that devaluation out. There's a bunch of kids sitting in a classroom somewhere being told that America is great and somebody so-and-so is enemies. They probably aren't condemned because they've heard that, but if they process that and then speak it out and they condemn the men who are outside of the false collective that they've been deceived into believing in, when they condemn them, then the condemnation starts for them. So in the time when that devaluation is within you, is the time to fix it. Because once it comes out your mouth, then you have harms that you've caused yourself that need to be repaired, and they may require saying things to repair them. They may even require going to your brother and getting forgiveness from him for having treated him in a diminishing fashion. Collectivism and the long distance thing, that's not possible. So you would have to get your forgiveness and get your repentance and say the right things about people in order to fix the problem that you caused. And if you don't do that, then the scripture talks about sending unrighteousness before you or unrighteousness before you. If you have that kind of judgment spoken out, then you're sending your unrighteousness ahead of you, and you'll arrive to find you're condemned for that, whether you perceive it or not. And you don't perceive it because there's no punishment. You know, to say that people on the other side of that fence are less than me, I could do that, and nothing would happen to me. I might not even feel anything. I might not feel superior or really feel like they're inferior, but I've made a judgment. I've made a statement of that, but at my discretion, I've decided to. And because I don't get punished, I just get used to it and make a habit of it, and let a bunch of people with wicked desires to rule and to be obeyed and those kinds of things, to let them set my righteousness and my going forward into judgment as being condemned because I believe what they said instead of what my proper measure of them and my judgment should be. If they're talking to you and measuring someone outside of your group as less than you, and they accept that kind of thing, so politics always is that way. When you're in the binary of politics, you're fighting one side against another. You think less of those people, and you think that they're worthy to be forced by you. You think their side is worthy, and you think that your side is worthy to force them. How can that be just? Do you own them now because they're those kind of people? Does people in this group that we've named and we've decided we're opposed to other people, do we own them so we can control them? When you agree with the controlling of people, you're agreeing with the unrighteousness of taking their liberty or their sovereignty from them by force, and how can that be right? It can't be right. So you're gonna have to